We're told we need to buy a home. It's going to be so great, but rarely people talk about this kind of stuff.
That's the reality of what higher interest rates is doing, is it prices so many people out, because even if they could have afforded that home a few years ago, now it's just like the monthly payment is so high.
This is also why we talk so much about not owning a home until you're financially ready to do so, because it will turn into a nightmare.
And I think people who say that buying a home is always better than renting, like they haven't lived through a situation like this, where all the things that could go wrong, they do.
This is actually the question I asked myself, which started my entire debt-free journey. How do you know if you're ready? And it was basically like, you're not.
And I was like, you know what? This ain't my job. So we put in a maintenance request, and the guy came and he just popped a new battery in, and I was like...
Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're talking about home ownership. From knowing when you're ready to buy to homeowner nightmares, we're answering some of the most asked questions there are about buying a home. Now, you really can't talk about home ownership without asking one of the most common questions there is out there: is buying better than renting? So, Lauren, that's a question for you.
Ooh, what a way to start the podcast here. Okay, so I haven't really thought too much about this other than what my own personal perspective is. So I will say, now that I've been a renter and a homeowner and now a renter again, I will say I do like being a renter. You know, we had actually a couple days ago, we had a leak coming down from our roof into the exhaust fan from our bathroom. So I texted the landlord and they sent somebody over and everything is good now. But when I was a homeowner, that would have costed me and I would have had to figure it out and stress about it. So in those ways, I really like renting. I like not having to do all the fixes or worry about having the extra money to do it. Those types of things. I do like owning a home, though, in the sense that it's mine and I get to like make decisions about it. Especially because like I love rescuing dogs and fostering and stuff. And sometimes that can get a little hairy and some landlords don't want you to have pets or anything like that. So my husband and I, we do like to own. We are probably going to own again in the near future in the Chicago area. But mostly just because it's our personal preference. I don't know if it financially makes sense, especially in this market that we're in right now. But for me, I like owning, but I also really, really, really enjoy the renter benefits. So I personally don't think you can go wrong. I mean, depending on your personal preferences, but I didn't talk about anything long-term there, but just like my personal preference. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think it completely depends on a person's situation, right? Like if you're not financially ready to own a home, then like renting is always going to be better than buying. Yes. But you know, like you said, long term, I think long term, the goal should be to own a home so that hopefully you can get to retirement age with it mostly paid off, or at least like you're kind of close to that payoff date, because that's going to be one of your largest expenses. And if you could take that out, then, you know, kind of like what we talked about in one of the last episodes about retirement planning, like if you can remove that largest expense from your budget, like you don't need to save as much for retirement, or you can have extra cash available to you. But like I know for me, like you said, having just ownership over something, like that's something that me and my wife have really been looking forward to. And one of the things that we're looking for when we buy a home is like a place that we can renovate, you know, a place that we can kind of craft and fix it up to be what we think we would enjoy, you know, and if that means taking out a wall or redoing the kitchen, like that's something we're excited for. There's a lot of benefits to renting. Like you said, we had the smoke detector battery went out, and I was like, you know what, this ain't my job. So we put in a maintenance request, and the guy came and he just popped a new battery in, and I was like, you know, like that's not something you can do, even as simple as something like that, right? Like I could have fixed it myself, but I didn't have to, and that's some of the benefits of renting. But the dog thing, like you said, like where we moved in Austin, now we have to pay like a monthly fee to have a dog. And we loved doing Rover, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's like you can watch other people's dogs and they'll pay you for it. We must have watched like 50 dogs last year. Aww. And now like we can't do that because we don't want to pay the monthly fee for it. And there's like a whole like interview process for it. But yeah, I think, you know, it's too simple of a question to ask is buying a home better than renting? Like it's going to depend on your situation, but I think long term, like that should be the goal for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And we need to stop shaming renters because, you know, especially with the way the market is right now, it's a little expensive to own a home. Like you said, and especially if you're not financially there. So
Yeah, with interest rates the way they are right now, like if you could have bought a home before 2020, like, you know, you would have been you're in a great position today. But yeah, it's tough out there right now because, you know, interest rates being so high, like if you compare what a 2% interest rate versus what a 6 or 7% interest rate, like what that does to your monthly payment, like it's crazy, right? Like we're talking like $500-$600 difference depending on the price of your home, which can totally make or break someone's budget when it comes to their total cost for housing. But yeah, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about like kind of this general idea of is buying better, is renting better? That's going to kind of flow throughout some of these questions, but why don't we jump into this first one?
Yeah. So this one says, when do you know you're financially ready to buy a home? My husband and I have been talking about buying our first real home together, but we're not entirely sure if we're financially ready for it yet. We finished paying off our debt about a year ago and have been saving for a down payment since. But it feels like even with a down payment saved, we won't be ready for home ownership. We hear so many stories of people buying their first home before they're actually ready and end up in complete nightmares, not to mention all the things that could go wrong with the house itself. Besides our down payment, what else should we be considering to know that we're ready to buy our first home?
I think this is a great question, and it kind of hits home for me because this is kind of where my wife and I are at. You know, we got out of debt a few years ago. We've been saving up for the last, I don't know, probably like 3 years. We've both been like kind of saving, and then obviously when we got married, we started saving jointly. But yeah, I think if you get to your savings goal, right, like that's kind of like step one, but that's not the only thing that I think you need to factor in when it comes to being prepared to buy a home. And so I kind of just jotted down a list of things that I think are really important. Now, obviously, like this person said, like they got out of their credit card debt, or I assume it was credit card debt, high interest debt, right? They got their debts paid off. I think that in itself is going to be really great because it's going to lower how much you have to spend on just monthly expenses. But also when you go to qualify for a mortgage, right, they look at 40% of your income. They don't want more than 40% going towards repaying debt. And that includes a mortgage, but that's also going to include like car loans and credit cards. So getting out of that debt, you're probably going to qualify for more. And it's also just going to make the budget easier. Yeah. And then one thing in particular is having a 6-month emergency fund saved up. Home ownership, like, you know, like Lauren talked about, like there's going to be so many random expenses that come up that are going to be your responsibility. But then some other things that I don't think people consider enough is like, are you consistently contributing to retirement, right? Like, can you cover your retirement and make sure that you can still afford a home? You just got to have all your bases covered. And then a stable job, you know, like if you work in maybe like a freelance career and your income can vary, right? Like it's going to be harder to qualify. In some months, you may not have enough to cover your mortgage payment. Having a stable career, or if you and like your spouse, one of them is stable, one of them has freelance work, like I think that's a great position to be in. And then obviously, like this person said, the down payment saved up and then looking for something that you can actually afford. I think if you can kind of hit that checklist and kind of run through where am I at in all these areas, that's going to help you feel more prepared to buy a home. But what do you think, Lauren? You know, you've actually gone through the home buying process, right? Me and my wife are currently in it, but you have a little more experience on this than I do.
Yeah. So this is actually the question I asked myself, which started my entire debt-free journey. Many years ago, I was like looking at homes to buy, and I was still like paying off my student loans, my car. I wasn't actually making that much money. I had probably $5,000 in savings, and I was looking at houses to buy. And I remember feeling like very unsure about it. So I Googled this almost the same question, like, how do you know if you're ready? And it was basically like, you're not. So I took a step back and realized like, okay, how can I get more money? And it was to honestly pay off my debt. So I did that first, and then really started the process of saving up. So like they said, you know, they worked off paying off their debt. That is great, because if you go into a home ownership situation with debt, it's likely you're just going to continue to add more debt on, because, you know, outside of just saving up your down payment, there's so many other things that are involved with home ownership that can and probably will go wrong. So you're going to need to have money for that. And a lot of people don't, and then just continue to get into credit card debt. But, you know, I like that they're asking this question. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, so like you said, definitely you want to have, you know, your credit cards paid off, whatever that looks like. I don't think you have to be 100% debt free to buy a home, but I do think it helps, you know? Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest thing is, a lot of people, when they think, okay, I pay off my debt, now I have my down payment. The down payment is such a small part. I mean, it's a big part of the home buying process, but like, do you have your emergency fund on? I don't want this down payment to be the only thing you have, and then you have nothing left after that. Do you have your emergency fund saved up? Do you have an extra little pot of money? Well, first off, for your closing costs, and then also to do anything that you want to do with this house. Unless it is move-in ready, you want to touch nothing, you don't want to paint a wall, then maybe you don't need that. But I personally think as soon as you move into a house, you're going to either want some new, you know, new furniture or something for it. You're going to want to paint a room, get a new appliance or something, have all of that there, because that's whenever, if you move in without those things, that's when it's going to start to become a nightmare. And that's usually what it is when people have to spend all this money and they just feel like they're just constantly like drowning in it. So yeah, I think that's a quick overview of what I think.
No, and I think you touched on a really important part. Like you said, like the down payment's really only one part of it, but like, there's closing costs. And for most homes, like that's going to be like 1 to 3% of the total purchase price. Right. So if you're buying a $300,000 house, you're looking at $9,000 in closing costs, and people don't consider that when they think of their down payment. But then the renovation costs, that's something me and my wife have saved up for, is renovating, because we know we want to find a place that's needs a little love, and so that we can do that. And then moving costs, that was a big one for us. We were moving halfway across the country, and so we saved up $10,000, and we, spent a good chunk of that money just between like the pod and shipping her car and then actually driving here, right? Like it's a 2-day trip, and so we had to stay in a few hotels. Like, there's a lot of other costs associated with not only just getting your financial foundation in place, but then the down payment's really only one part of that picture. There's other costs that I think people don't consider, especially like that first question we asked, like, is renting better than buying, or vice versa? Like, it's not just the down payment. It's not just what you're paying on a monthly basis. It's all the other costs associated with it. Yeah,
definitely. But I love that they're asking this question. I think a lot of people don't ask this question,
Yeah.
They just go into it because we're told since we're very little that to be successful, you have to get a good job, get married and buy a house, so that's just a normal step of life. And a lot of people don't run the numbers or ask these type of questions. So I think they're on the right track here. But yeah, just thinking about those few extra things as you get into homeownership will definitely start you on the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. And asking those questions too, like, am I ready? Can I run the numbers? Can I actually afford this? Like, it's not just with home ownership. Like, it should be with pretty much every big decision. I would say any decision that's more than like $500, right? Like, can I actually afford this? Especially if you're going to take on a monthly payment for it. But yeah, why don't we jump into the next one? So this one, it's a little bit longer, but it's a really good read. So this person wrote, "My new home is a nightmare. Please help. My husband and I bought our first home in February. The market was horrendous, so when we got our offer accepted on this condo, we were so excited. 2 months in, and I absolutely hate this place. We had to fix a lot of the plumbing in our laundry room, which was expected, so okay. Then we had a leak from the poorly connected refrigerator water line. We had to open up the wall, make repairs, put the wall back, and paint. Next, we started hearing rodents in our basement ceiling, and we were still dealing with that. After that, our sump pump got stuck. More plumber work and more money. In the meantime, I did a lot of work on the little backyard that we share with the unit above, which means fencing it in and getting landscaping done. After that, we had water leak number 2, this time caused by a big storm where the wind pushed water into the poorly sealed screen door of my upstairs neighbor right into our kitchen. Had to completely replace a part of the ceiling. And tonight, while we still have a hole in our ceiling, I went to use the kitchen sink and water seems to be leaking downstairs all over the ground. I don't know what I'm looking for. Sympathy, maybe advice. This has been a constant disaster. We have a small toddler, which makes the logistics of getting this stuff fixed a lot more complicated. We are thinking of putting the place back on the market, even though we'll probably lose money, but frankly, this is no life. I never want to own a home again. I want to move to one of those cement, sterile apartment buildings where it all looks the same, and if something breaks, you just call maintenance. What should we do?"
See, Nick, that's why I told you I like renting, because when things happen like this, you get it fixed and you're not on the hook for it. But this sucks. I don't like hearing stories like this, especially for first time homeowners, just because you don't really know what to expect. And I just said this, we're told we need to buy a home. It's going to be so great, but rarely people talk about this kind of stuff. I think it's most overwhelming because everything seems to be happening at once for these people. And it's so defeating, right?
Yeah.
There's one thing's happening, you're getting it fixed, and then something else is happening. I personally am probably not going to sell this, because if they just bought this 2 months ago, you're going to lose a ton of money.
Yeah.
And you're still likely going to have to fix everything before you sell it, because you're, as a seller, you're obligated to tell the buyer like what's wrong with the house. And a lot of times they're going to want you to fix it anyway. So for me, I'm probably just going to fix the things that absolutely need done first. Obviously, anything plumbing related, just get it fixed. But I'm going to be pausing all those additional projects. So I know that she mentioned that they had done like the fencing and landscaping. I'm putting all of that money that you're using for that kind of stuff, and I'm going to put it towards like the actual fixes of the house.
Yeah.
Same thing with your budget. If you don't have the funds to be fixing these things, which kind of sounds like they don't based on like the stress it's causing, I'm cutting all discretionary spending and fixing these issues. And then I feel like once you get these things done, you'll be able to breathe again and hopefully be able to enjoy your new home a little bit once everything is fixed. But yeah, I think this is a really good reminder to have that emergency fund build up because things are going to happen in your home. It's not if, it's when, so but this is also why we talk so much about, not owning a home until you're financially ready to do so, because it will turn into a nightmare. And this is the exact situation that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's crazy because I feel like people always see home ownership through like, what's that expression, like rose colored glasses, where like they see it as like, oh, that's the goal. And when I get that, it's always going to be amazing. And this is exactly why, like we tell people, you don't buy a home without having a solid emergency fund. And even then, maybe even having a fund for home repairs. Cause this, this couple, it sounds like they're really going through it, right? It sounds like they may have gone through a lot of their savings, especially with having taken on that backyard project. Cutting all the discretionary spending is definitely going to be a must, but like also having a toddler, right? Like that's making the situation a whole lot more complex. And I think people who say that buying a home is always better than renting, like they haven't lived through a situation like this where all the things that could go wrong, they do. And now look, like that's not going to be everyone's situation, right? Like Lauren, I think when you said you bought your home, like you said there was a leak and you guys had to fix that. And like, that was kind of like one issue and it's like, cool, we dealt with that and we're good. Like I'd say that's probably what's more typical, like the typical experience, but like, this is always a possibility where you buy something and everything goes wrong, or you finally get all these things fixed and then boom, the roof needs to get fixed again or needs to be replaced, right? Like that's another 10, 20 grand expense that you need to just shell out, right? Yep. Yeah, no, this sucks. And I think, like you said, this person, they got to put all the discretionary spending on hold. They got to pause all the unnecessary projects and they really got to focus on what do we absolutely need to get fixed. But selling this it doesn't seem like an option unless they're really willing to lose the money. At the very least, right? They're going to lose the money on the closing costs. And then they're probably going to have to make those repairs, like you said. Like, I just don't think it's a viable option.
Yeah. And something that I thought of, because I've only bought one home and we're about to do another one, but making sure that you have a good home inspector come look at the property before you buy it. And what I'll say is, sometimes your realtor will be like, oh, I know somebody and this is who we use. And typically realtors do work with somebody and they're good, but I think they're more on the side of like the realtors and getting the property closed and, everything, sealed up there. So maybe hire one yourself that you found and vetted for yourself and that they're going to be on your side. They're going to want to tell you exactly what's wrong with it, not just what the realtor wants to hear and to kind of push you through the process. And please, please, please don't ever waive an inspection unless you have lots and lots of money, because you really don't know what's going on, even down to the foundation level, unless you're, a home inspector and know that kind of stuff. But that's also something I thought about this. Did they even have an inspection? Did they go with the one the realtor suggested just because that's what you do? Right? Like I've fallen into that too. But I've heard from the other side that, those things are, can be swayed a little bit based on who you're working with. So that is something to keep in mind too.
Yeah. And I think the kind of cherry on top of this pile of crap is that they said that they bought a condo, which means that they're probably paying an HOA. And so on top of all the other expenses, they probably have, HOAs can be as cheap as $50, but can be as high as like $500 or $600, that's just kind of making the situation a whole lot worse, I think. But yeah, like you said, with the home inspector too, like depending on where you live, you might want to look at like specialty home inspectors for certain things. Cause a lot of times home inspectors, they kind of do like a superficial look, right? Like they may not look at the roof extremely well, especially if you're in an area where like maybe you take a lot of snow and then the roofs have to be done a certain way, or there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong, and maybe like you said, they just use the realtor's home inspector, and that person maybe didn't do as good of a job as they could have, because a lot of these things I would imagine would have been coming up beforehand, right? Like the water coming in from upstairs or the sink, like that doesn't seem like it's just a new issue that happened in the few months that they've lived here. But yeah, this is a shitty situation, no doubt.
Yeah. And as soon as they get this stuff fixed, I think they'll be fine. It's just everything happening at once. And that's why they just want to sell it. But if they take a zoom out and then look at the bigger picture, like there's some bumps in the road here, but they're probably going to be able to enjoy themselves in their new condo once they get everything taken care of. Yeah. All right. Let's jump into the next one here. This is a good one. How much house can we really afford? My fiance and I are both teachers. Combined, we bring home about $130K per year, which comes out right around $7,500 per month that hits our bank account. We are now just starting to save a down payment after finally getting out of debt. We honestly have no clue how much we should even be saving up, let alone how much we could realistically afford to buy. We've been looking around on Zillow for homes between 200 to 300K, but truth be told, we have no idea what we're doing. My expertise is in cats and wrangling third graders. Please send help.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. And I think this is a place where a lot of people are stuck at, because I think the issue is if you go and get pre-qualified for a mortgage, they're going to tell you the most you can borrow. They're not going to tell you what you can actually afford. And like I said earlier, most of the time they're going to give you like a 40% debt to income ratio. And that's kind of how they're going to work backwards from the payment to what's the most you can afford. And a lot of people see that as cool. That's my budget. Then I can go look at homes at $400,000 when I should have been buying one at like 250 or 300,000. And so I like to work backwards from your income. Let's start with your income. Let's say, cool, what's 30% of that? And that's what I can afford to put towards housing on a monthly basis. So based on this person's take home pay, or this couple's take home pay, I should say, they're looking at around like $2,200 a month, right? Now, one tool that I always like to use, and look, it's not going to be 100% accurate until you get it into, you're talking with a loan officer who's going to be able to run the numbers for you, but this can at least give you a good ballpark estimate of what you're looking at. I like to use Zillow, look up at a home. Let's just say it's at $300,000, right? This person said they want to look between 2 and 300. Pull up a $300,000 home, and you can kind of run the numbers based on your area and based on what the interest rates are today. And then also what you can afford to put down as a monthly payment, or excuse me, as a down payment for the home. That's all those numbers are going to contribute to what your monthly payment is. But yeah, I think if they worked backwards, right? I looked up Zillow just in the local Austin area. A $300,000 house at today's interest rates is going to come out to about $2,400 a month. And so that's going to include mortgage payment, PMI, property taxes, and insurance. And that's with a 10% down payment. Now, if they were to go to a $200,000 house with all things else the same, that drops their monthly payment down to $1,600, right? And so that $300,000 house is probably going to be too expensive for them. And the $200,000 house, maybe that's not going to get them exactly what they love, but it's also going to give them a lot of breathing room. And, we said this in the last episode as well, but if you're coming in on paper right at 30%, in real life, like those numbers are going to break the budget, right? You want to come in a little below what you can actually afford, because when life happens, when expenses come up, or when the numbers that you ran, like that's not what you're actually getting back, like you want to have that breathing room so that things don't just fall apart in front of you.
Yeah, definitely. And you're so right about, mortgage lenders telling you, oh, you can afford a $400,000 house. Of course, they're going to tell you that. They're getting your interest and they're getting your money. So they're going to try to get you to take out as much money as possible. But that's a really bad idea. So yeah, you need to run the numbers on your own. And something I thought about for them, they're asking good questions like, we're doing the math here. We're trying to figure this out. But something that we don't always think about, that I realized when we first owned our first home, your monthly payment can actually fluctuate a little bit from year to year because of the taxes. And then if your homeowner's insurance goes up, like we noticed our payment went up like $100 to $200 more per month. Yeah. So you have to take that into account too. That's why you should never buy at the top of your range, because these are the things that come into it. So, I'm always going to suggest, like you said, probably go under a little bit, because then you're probably going to end up right where you thought you would, based on everything else that you're going to be paying or any expenses that are going up. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, the property taxes, that's a big one. Most places, they'll reassess your property value every couple of years, and then your taxes are going to go up, right? And so on a 30-year mortgage, you're going to see an increase across that entire 30 years, like at least 10 times your payment's probably going to be adjusted. But this person's also asking, like, how much should we be saving up? And, Lauren, like we talked about, it's more than just that down payment, right? It's the down payment, it's closing costs, any renovation costs, any moving costs. Are you moving just one neighborhood over or one city over or a new state? It's going to vary. And now if they were to go for that $300,000 house, like all those things considered, right? Like a 10% down payment and closing costs of about 3% of the total price, like those two things alone is going to be almost 40 grand, and so making 130K, like how quickly can you save up 40 grand to get this done? Now the down payment, right? Like we can always we can always adjust based on what's realistic for you to save up, right? Maybe 10% is quite a bit. And you're like, cool, I'm going to save up like 5 or 6%. But that's also going to affect your monthly payments. So you got to kind of look at the numbers and that's why I like using Zillow. And again, it's not 100% accurate out there, but it at least can give you a good estimate so that when you get closer to making these decisions, you're in the ballpark area of having the right amount of savings built up.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm never one that says like you have to have 20% saved to buy a home. But I think it's most important that, say you have 3 to 5% saved up. I don't want you to just have that saved up. I want you to have a bucket of money set aside so you can actually breathe a little bit, maybe do some home renovations, whatever happened in the last situation, be prepared for something like that. So I think that's the most important thing for me. Like maybe having access to 10, 20%, but maybe only using like 3 to 5% of it. That's what I typically say if you want to. I mean, sure, if you do the 20%, great. You're not going to have any PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. But I think that, if you have that extra money there, maybe hang on to it so you can do a few things.
No, that's a really good point. And that's something that me and my wife have been looking at. Like, okay, when we go and we're sitting down with like the loan officer, we want to look at what is 10% down? What is 15%? What is 20% down? How does that affect the monthly payment? Right. Because if we're looking at putting down an additional $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, how much is that going to save us on a monthly basis? And is that like opportunity cost of putting that amount down versus the monthly savings? Is that worth it? Right? Because in my mind, like, I don't know that I'd rather put down $20,000, not have access to that cash just to lower my monthly payment $150, right? Like it's going to take me years to recoup that amount of money. I would rather pay the extra $150 and retain that cash for when emergencies are going to come up, additional renovations, and then worst case 2 years down the road, cool, I can just pay that down on the mortgage anyway, So it's really going to depend on your situation. You always got to run the numbers on these things. Yep,
I agree.
Yeah. And then one last thing I did want to say about it, like, this person's like looking at a range of 200 or 300. I would say like 200 to 250 maximum. Give yourself that breathing room. And I think I think most people would agree that they would be better off in a situation where it's like, hey, this isn't the dream house, right? Like this, we didn't get everything that we wanted on our priority list checked off. But if you're in a good financial situation in that house, you're going to be in so much better of a position than if you buy the house that you absolutely love and it just wrecks your finances and things become a nightmare. Like you're not going to love that house either. So it's always going to be a trade-off though.
Yeah. And I think, there's people that get very emotional. Homes are very emotional purchases because a lot of people are like, it's our forever home, but I think so a lot of people can make very emotional purchases when it comes to homes and they might even go to the 350 range here in this example. And then they become house poor and then they literally can't afford life. They can't go on vacation and they're stuck in this house. So I hope you really like it because you're not going to be able to do other things, but that's where the term like house poor comes in whenever literally all your money is going towards your home. So that's something to keep in mind too.
No, absolutely. And it's always the forever home until circumstances change or you look at a new area and you like that area more. Like very few people are going to stay in the same place for the rest of their lives when they buy their first home. The situations change. A lot of times people buy a home for their current life and then they need to upgrade down the road when they have kids or, whatever it is, right? Maybe you take in some relatives or something like your idea of what a perfect home looks like is going to evolve as you get older. And, don't fall in love with the home so much as you fall in love with like, hey, we just love living in this area, and we can always adjust as we need to.
Yep, definitely.
All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode.
Cool. Why don't we move into the next one? So this person wrote, can someone explain buying a house and mortgage to me like I'm 5 years old? I'm 26 years old, currently renting, and have never owned a home. I have decided to start saving to buy my first place. I've read many articles about the home buying process and mortgages, but there's so much conflicting information out there. I really do not understand all the steps involved in the buying process, and I cannot seem to get a constant mortgage payment estimate. Even websites that estimate your mortgage payments give me very different numbers. I'd like to buy a house for $150,000 or less, and one website estimates $600 per month, and another one told me $900 per month. How can I figure this out? What numbers do I need to crunch?
I love this. I just wonder where they're at that they can buy a house for 150,
right?
Yeah. Unless it's like a fixer upper, but then that's a whole other question that I won't go into here. So to understand like what goes into your mortgage payment, it's a lot. And this is great for a 26-year-old to be asking this question. Mm-hmm. Again, not many people do. They go out and say, hey, how much can I afford? Great. That's the house I want, So, you have to think about this. Mortgage comes down to a few things, right? So first off, the loan amount. How much are you going to be taking out for this mortgage? And what down payment do you have? Because that also, how much are you going to be borrowing overall? Yeah. So like we mentioned, you could have a down payment anywhere from like 3 to 20% or whatever you want to do, right? And then as far as the mortgage goes, interest rates. Now, this is something that's been a hot topic over the past few years, but back in 2020, 21, when I got my first mortgage, we were at 2.9%, right? And that was incredible. These days, though, the rates are higher. You'd probably look in between 6 and 7% at this point. And like you said, that can be a very large amount per month. Like, would you say about $500 more per month?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then also you're going to look at the loan term. So I've played around with this lately. Typically 30-year fixed is pretty common, but if you mess around with like 10, 15 years, you're going to see how much interest comes off of like the life of the loan. It's insane. So your payment goes up maybe a couple $100, but if you look at the overall amount of interest that you save, it's insane. So like if I was running the numbers on like a $500,000 house, and I'm taking out like a 30-year fixed mortgage, maybe a 20% down payment or something, the overall interest was actually more than the house that I would finance, So when you change that to 10 and 15%, or 10 to 15-year loan, it goes down quite a bit. Like I was very surprised at that. So that's also something you need to consider. Are you going to take out a 30-year or are you going to try to go lower 10, 15-year? It's totally dependent on your situation. Biggest thing, property taxes and insurance. And this is going to vary by location. So I will say we just moved to the Chicago area from Pittsburgh, and it was much more affordable to live in Pittsburgh than it is here. Property taxes are much higher here. I'm not sure what they're like in your area, Nick. I know probably.
We're known for high property taxes in Texas.
Oh, in Texas? Okay. I wasn't sure. You guys don't have, what tax don't you have there? Is it like?
No state income tax, which is right. I'm loving that.
Yeah. But I'm assuming you also had high property taxes when you were living in California as well. Can
I just make one side note? When we were moving to Texas, everyone, relatives and stuff, they're like, why would you move there? Property taxes are so high. And if you compare one for one, a $300,000 home in Texas and a $300,000 home in California, you're paying like maybe $20 more a month. But the problem is California average home price is not $300,000. It's like $800,000. So real dollars per month, you're paying more. It's just your property tax rate is just slightly lower.
Yeah.
That's kind of just one side rant. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's good. But yeah, property taxes and insurance. So, and like I said, it's going to vary where you live, but for insurance, you could always, get a quote and see like what your range could be, because like I said, some of these areas, especially with like California fires these days, or like Florida getting hit with all the hurricanes, like their homeowners insurance is skyrocketing. So that is very important to make sure, because could you afford the loan? Potentially, but then the homeowner's insurance could make or break the deal for you, And then if you're not putting down a full 20%, you are going to have private mortgage insurance, which I think the rule of thumb is like for every 100,000 finance, it's like $50 a month for that mortgage insurance. So, and then closing costs, right? Like fun. I get to pay a mortgage. I get to do all these things. I have my down payment, but you need to come to closing with that extra money on top of all that, right? So, typically, what is that? Like 1.5 to 2% of the total cost of the home. So if you're saving for that, you should also be saving for your closing costs as well.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more than just a down payment involved in buying a home. And while you were running through all that, I kind of ran some numbers on a $300,000 house. If you buy at today's interest rates, so around 6.7%, you're looking at a $2,342 monthly payment.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to buy at Lauren, what you got back like 5 years ago at 2.9%, that's a $600 difference in monthly mortgage costs, you know? And like, that's the reality of what higher interest rates is doing is that, yeah, your monthly payment, like it prices so many people out, because even if they could have afforded that home a few years ago, now it's just like the monthly payment is so high. And like you said, if you look at a mortgage loan calculator, you're going to just almost be disgusted. Like, okay, I'm borrowing $300,000. And if you look at the total amount of interest you pay, most of the time it's worth more than what you actually paid for the house. So it's not fun to look at those numbers sometimes.
No, but you know, I love that this person's asking this question, because I didn't know all this stuff until I really started getting into the home buying process. So knowing this beforehand and being able to map all this out will definitely save you in the long run. Like we talked about, if you think your base number is this, just go higher, because it's probably going to be based on, you know, everything that's been happening lately. So
yeah. And now I wonder how this person came to the $150,000 like budget that they set.
Yeah.
I would almost just like, I mean, if they're in an area where that's just kind of the average, that's amazing. But I would work backwards, right? Don't look at the amount of house that you want to buy. Let's instead look at how much can I afford on a monthly basis. We don't know this person's income, but I would say take, 28%. You give yourself just a little buffer there. Take 28% of that, figure out what monthly payment you can afford, and then you can kind of back into the price of the home based on what today's interest rates are. You can also factor in some things like utilities if you want to include that in that 28%, and homeowners insurance in your area, depending on where you live, right? Like getting fire insurance in California is just not happening right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if this person's getting wildly different numbers though, that's going to just be a tough thing to go through, and they can go get pre-qualified, and those will usually last you like 3 months. But that's also just going to give you some realistic numbers in terms of not necessarily what you can afford, but how the numbers look on paper in relation to what you would be borrowing at that interest rate.
Yeah. And I also wonder about the $150,000 house. Like, is this a house they're going to need to fix up or whatever? Because that's also another factor. Like I mentioned before, like you're going to want to have money set aside so you can fix things up, or when something breaks, because if things are old in the home, things are going to break and you're going to have to replace them. So just something else to keep in mind there. But I think that actually goes into the next question really well. The next question says, should I buy an investment property as my first home purchase? Hoping to get a little insight into whether or not this is a good idea for me and my wife. For context, my wife and I live in a medium cost of living city and happily rent a single family home. We're in our late 20s, both working stable careers, but have never owned real estate. We're considering purchase a rental property outside the city where home prices are nearly half the cost as here. Our thought is to put down 20% and make sure we can comfortably afford the monthly payment even without a tenant. Doing this rather than buying a primary home for us to live in would allow us to continue renting in an area we love and give us flexibility to move around with work. Are there any major flaws to this plan?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what my wife and I are going through right now. And I think one thing to note is that like just because you can afford to buy a home doesn't mean that you need to go out and buy a home, right? At least not in this moment. And like, Lauren, like we said, I think long term, the goal for everyone should be to buy a home if you can get in the right financial situation to afford it, right? Yeah. That's just going to be stabilizing one of the most expensive costs in your budget as you head into retirement. But in today or the next couple of years, that decision doesn't have to be made yet. Now, if they're happy with where they're at, right? Like they love the flexibility, they love their area, maybe they otherwise couldn't afford to live in that area, then continue renting and then put your money to work for you some way, right? Now, does that necessarily mean investing into a property? I think long term, that might be a good idea, because then you get in at today's rates, even though you don't want to live in a home permanently right now. You can kind of lock that in, potentially move to that later on in life. But the reason why it might not be a good idea is because real estate investing comes with so much more hassle factor, and so much more hidden costs, right? Not necessarily hidden, but costs that you don't consider when you're looking at just the price of the home. Especially if this person's asking about buying this as an investment property, that means tenants. Is this person ready to be a landlord, to go through the background checks for tenants, to make sure that they find the right one, to make sure that they can find reputable maintenance people to come work on this home when something comes up? There's a whole lot more to it than, I should just buy a home right now because we can afford to, right? Like if you come to the conclusion like, hey, I don't want to deal with the added hassle of owning real estate, I would dump all that money into the market, into like a good S&P 500 ETF, and just kind of ride out on your investment. Now, long term, like the gain may not be the same, but you're also lowering your hassle factor with that investment significantly, right? So I don't know. I think personally, like, I think that's the route we're looking for, getting into an investment property, but we're also okay with, we've done the research. We know what it comes with. We know that there is going to be hassle factor, but long-term, that's kind of the plan that we want to pursue, right? I can't say that that's, the case for this person. They got to kind of ask themselves those questions. But
Nick, I thought real estate investing was passive. I thought that it was easy and that everyone could do it.
I don't know. Like, there is almost no passive investment other than just putting money into the stock market.
Yeah.
And even then, like, you still have to work for that money to put it in. And that's going to be the bulk of the work right there. There's very little like true passive passive income or passive investments outside of the stock market.
I really hate when people say that about real estate, unless you get like a property manager. But I don't know. I feel like if it was my property that I owned, I still wouldn't trust a property manager anyway. I like that they're doing themselves a favor here by, saying that they have the money to afford it even without a tenant. They like renting. They're just potentially, wanting to purchase this property. That's good for them. Like you said, if you want to be a landlord, if you want this as like a long-term play for you, then go for it, but I'm not doing this for myself. I don't know about you, Nick, but like I would rather do anything else other than manage a property and have tenants to have to deal with. I just don't trust people. But I think it can work out in their favor if they want to do this. If they're living in a high cost of living city or medium cost of living that they said, and they want to go further out, this could work for them. But yeah, are they looking to make money quickly with the rental property, or are they looking to have something more long term? Because I think it's just such a buzzword out there these days to have real estate, real estate that you can, rent out to people. And that's such a good investment for you. And it's like, sure. But like at the same time, like sometimes you might not even net anything per month if there's something wrong within the apartment. So I think that's a question they need to ask themselves too. Like, are they looking for something more short term or more long term in their situation?
Yeah. And, this person asked, are there any major flaws in this plan? And I don't think there's necessarily flaws in this, right? Like people do this all the time. They rent someplace and then they go buy an investment property. They love where they live and they're building equity somewhere else. That there's no flaw in doing that. As long as you run the numbers, you buy a place that you can actually afford. The problem is you have to consider, is this a step you're willing to take? Or do you want to just be hands off, focus on your career, focus on living life, and not have the added hassle? Now, I do think I'm a little biased, right? Like my mom, a real estate agent, my dad's a general contractor who specializes in building homes. So like real estate's kind of just something that I see as like, okay, if I want to build wealth, that's kind of the route that I want to go down the road. But there is nothing wrong with sitting on a huge investment portfolio with all your money sitting in like an ETF or even individual stocks, if that's kind of your game, right? Mm-hmm. You got to assess, are you willing to deal with the added hassle factor? I think that's such a big part to it. And I know I've said that word so many times, but like that is the big part when it comes to owning real estate, especially investment real estate. Is that something you're willing to put up with?
Yeah, it's definitely not for me. I know that.
Yeah, and that's fair, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So why don't we jump into the next one? So kind of like that first question we asked at the very beginning of the episode, this one is another one of those kind of hot topics, a little bit controversial. So this person asked, are home flippers ruining the market? It seems like everyone and their mother is flipping homes these days. Every time I look at the homes on the market, it's an obvious flip. Bought it a few months ago and trying to sell it for $100,000 more. I am so annoyed because I feel like these people are ruining the housing market. All these people think they are Chip and Joanna Gaines from Fixer Upper, or they watch all the home renovation shows on HGTV and want to do the same thing. I'm not going to lie. I love doing that. I just want to be able to buy a home for the first time, and I can't because of these insane prices. These people are buying all the lower priced homes that some of us could possibly afford as a first time homeowner, but it looks like these people have inside connections to buy these homes within a day, leaving regular people out of luck. Am I crazy, or are these people ruining the housing market? Are they part of the problem of inflated home prices?
Yeah, I mean, definitely part of it a little bit. So it's funny because, like I said, we're looking to purchase in the Chicagoland area, and this is what I see constantly out there. So I love looking at real estate. Like I don't like like rental real estate or anything like that, but I love just looking at homes and seeing what they sell for and looking at all of the history of the costs and things like that. So I will, if I see a house on the market that I really like and it's a fresh flip, you can tell because it's completely brand new inside. I like to look and see what they paid for it and what they're selling it for. So recently in my area, they'll buy like a home probably from somebody who's lived there their entire life. It was probably, last time I was renovated was probably the 70s, and they'll buy it for like $350. Like that's what like a flippable house is going for in my area. And then they will completely flip it. And like probably 10 months later, they'll sell it for like $300,000 more. Wow. So that's what I've been seeing in my area. Now for me, I'm like, okay, like that could potentially work because, you know, I'm getting a brand new home out of this, you know, depending if it's a good flip or not, you know, not all flips are created equal, but yeah, it's going to price some people out and it's going to, you know, I think the bigger issue is like, what is it doing to like the home prices in the area? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to stop focusing too much on like, you know, if me and you were to flip a house together or something, but it's the bigger corporations that are making this issue, you know, much worse. So, you know, flippers in general, they're driving the prices up, you know, when the house was sold for $350 and now it's going for $550 or $600K, that's an issue, right? They're reducing the inventory for the regular buyer. They're also coming in. This person mentioned, how are they getting a connection in there? It's because they have cash. They can close really quick and that's how they're getting those houses faster than somebody who's going to take out a mortgage for them. Right. Mm-hmm. But then like I also mentioned, it's raising the prices and, you know, you come into gentrification where you are raising property taxes and the value and it's pushing out poor people. So it definitely can contribute to market issues, but I don't think like me and you are the problem. It's like the BlackRocks of the world. I heard somebody say that like BlackRock should have some sort of limit or something because they are the ones that are, I think, creating this or affecting this housing market. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It's a hot topic too.
Yeah, you know, it definitely is. And I think it's just dangerous to make huge generalizations like, oh, all flippers are bad. Or even like before we've talked about like all landlords are evil, right? Like I think if someone goes out and buys a property, right, and they add value to that property, they renovate it, they do deserve to be compensated for it. Now, how much are they increasing the price, right? Like that can be something to look at. Mm-hmm. But, you know, like you said, like not all flips are created equal. And I think you got to take each case individually, right? Like there are some shitty flippers out there who do the bare minimum to make the home appear livable, right? To where, okay, this person buys it and then 6 months down the road, they realize all the issues. There's shitty people like that, right? And there's shitty landlords out there. And I think that all that's to say is like, there are just shitty people in general, in all areas of everything, right? Of all areas of business and personal life. And I don't think it's necessarily like the flippers that are the issue. It's people who take advantage of situations like these. But I think if you are going to buy a home and add value to it, you do deserve to get paid for that. Now, I think the bigger issue, like you said, Lauren, is massive companies, massive corporations buying up billions of dollars of real estate and you know, essentially artificially inflating the prices of it because they own so much real estate. There's so much less for just the regular person to buy. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough issue because there's both sides of it, right? It does suck to be priced out as someone who maybe you grew up in a town your whole life and now like you see all these investors coming in and you can't afford to buy a home when a few years ago you might have been able to. Yeah.
And, you know, the companies like BlackRock, they're coming in and turning homes into rentals. And then, you know, that's driving the costs up. They're raising the rent. And they really just kind of have control of the market. So I think that's more of the issue than anything else. There was a crazy situation whenever I lived in Pittsburgh. It was like not a hostage situation, but the person had barricaded himself into his home. It was actually had been evicted. They had police there to get him out. And then he went in with, you know, some guns and stuff. But a company like a BlackRock had bought the house for $25,000 and, you know, was going to come in and, you know, change the whole thing and flip it and all that good stuff. But so it creates like bad situations like that. I don't know. It's a problem. And I don't think that unless they get some sort of regulation or law put in place, like BlackRock is not going to stop because it's just a huge corporation that is making lots and lots of money and completely changing the landscape of housing.
Yeah, I think big companies like that, like I don't think many people would disagree that is an issue. In terms of like the home flippers, you know, I think people look at it and they see like, oh, like you're just taking advantage of the situation. And I do think there's a very specific person who buying from a flipper would greatly appreciate it, right? Like you buy this house in an area that you really like, and the home has been newly renovated to feel like it's almost brand new, right? Like not everyone either has the skills or even wants to put in the time to renovate a home, right? It's a very specific set of skills where you can look at, assess the property's value, say, okay, can I make money on this flip? Can I actually do the renovations or hire the right contractors who are going to do these renovations? And then can I resell it for a profit, right? Like there's a whole lot of skill there, and not everyone wants to go through that process. So I think there's like a middle ground to this is what I'm saying, right? Like it's not like it's good or bad. There are shitty people. There are people who do it well. The big corporations, I think that's kind of the bigger issue at hand here. But yeah, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with home flippers. But I do think there is an issue with just rising costs in general, right? And I don't think that comes down to like the people who do home flipping on like as like kind of one-off individual business owners who are doing it as their way of earning a living, you know?
Yeah. And I agree with what you said there about like, you know, so what I've noticed in my own neighborhood is like the homes that are 350, they're like so old that like I don't know if you would ever want to like I mean potentially you could live there, but like this person like saying like a buyer, like somebody that could afford it, be able to live there, and it's like I don't think you would even want to. So for me, what our neighborhood looks like is this: 350 is like the house that like the kitchen is literally from the 70s that it needs replaced most likely, and everything else, the carpet, the shag carpet, everything, you know. But then you're seeing houses like 450, 500 that have really good, you know, some good renovations to them. Maybe some certain things need done. And then 600 to 650 are like the fully flipped ones. So I've considered it just because like you said, like you're getting what you want and you don't have to do all of that work or, you know, put any time into that. So we've been looking at them for sure. But yeah, there's just such a range like in there between like not livable to like it's fully flipped, ready to go. And it is a big range, but sometimes it is worth it because if that's the type of home you want to live in, that's the cost of it, you know?
Yeah. It's funny you say that. We went and looked at this house, and it was kind of being marketed as like, oh, you get to kind of make this home exactly how you want it. And the kitchen was not built. They just had like the water lines and the electrical lines. And then the master bathroom was not put together at all. Right. And so like they had like conceptual images on the listing of like, oh, this is what you could make it look like. And I was like, holy shit, like this place looks really awesome. It's super cheap. And then when, you know, I actually read into it, it was like, okay, yeah, because none of that stuff's there. That's going to cost another 50 to 100 grand to do it well, right? Because the only things that were there were like the water hookups. So it's just, that's kind of like the middle ground of like not finishing the flip, and maybe they just needed to sell it to get out of a bad deal that they walked themselves into. Yeah,
I think that happens to people. Like they're just because they buy a house real cheap, sight unseen, or with cash and no inspection, and then like the foundation is cracked, and they're like, well, there goes my entire budget, you know?
Yeah. If you're someone who thinks like all flippers are shitty, look at people who have failed at flipping. And I think that can help you at least develop a little appreciation for people who do it well. Because I think people who do it well add a valuable service and deserve to be paid. There are so many cases where people buy a home thinking, oh, I'm going to flip this. It's my first time going through it. And then it's a complete nightmare, just like someone buying a house that they couldn't afford to buy. Right.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. I know we talked about a lot of potentially controversial things and a lot of homeowner nightmares, but if you found any value from today's episode, please, if you could just subscribe, and then the best way you can help us grow is to share this with a friend.
Yeah, and if you want to have your money question answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the submit a question button. And don't forget to join us for another episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.